This video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. More about them later in the video. So this is the iPhone XR and this is the iPhone XS. Now, if we're going to compare these phones to find out which one is a better buy in 2021, the decision will ultimately come down to, I'd say, 4 things. So the build quality, the battery life, the cameras, and most importantly, the screen, which is arguably one of the biggest difference between these phones. So we'll talk about all of that, and hopefully I can help you decide which phone would be better for you. I think the iPhone XR might be a better buy for most people. I'll explain why, but I'll start with design and build quality. Okay, so when it comes to design, I actually really like the way both phones look. They both have a really nice and simple design. Both phones have Gorilla Glass on both sides with a glossy finish. It's just nothing fancy like Victus or Ceramic Shield, and I'm fine with that because I think it's good enough. In terms of durability, the iPhone XR has an aluminum frame with a matte finish, and the iPhone XS has a stainless steel frame, which is more durable than aluminum. So I personally prefer stainless steel. But if you're gonna use a case, it really doesn't matter. The iPhone XR is also a few millimeters thicker than the iPhone XS, and you can feel the difference, but I wouldn't say this makes one better than the other. Now, the iPhone XS I have is in silver and the iPhone XR is in white. And although I like both colors, I will give the edge to the iPhone XR because this white color does a far better job of hiding fingerprints, which makes my job of filming this phone a lot easier. That might not apply to you, but it's something I genuinely like about this phone in this color. Now, both phones are water and dust resistant, which is great, but the iPhone XR is IP67 water resistant and the iPhone XS is IP68 water resistant. Small difference, but I think worth mentioning. So I would give the iPhone XR a 7.5 out of 10 and the iPhone XS an 8 out of 10 for design and build quality. Overall, I do think the iPhone XS feels just a little more premium and is more durable than the XR, but I still don't think you should be concerned about durability regardless of which phone you buy. Now, surprisingly, the iPhone XS has a 2658 mAh battery and the iPhone XR has a 2942 mAh battery. So yes, the iPhone XR has a physically larger battery, and you certainly won't be wrong if you think the iPhone XR has better battery life. This is just a bigger phone. It has more space for a larger battery. It makes sense. So my XS usually gets around 4 hours of screen on time with 78% battery health, but the XR with 90% battery health can easily last all day. So 5 to sometimes even 6 hours of screen on time. Here's another screenshot from the XR. You can see I got 3.5 hours of screen on time, but I started my day with 50% battery. So if I do the math right, I would get somewhere around 7 hours of screen on time, which is insane for a 3-year-old phone. But there is a significant difference between the battery health of these phones, and these numbers may not be the same for you depending on your usage and the battery health of your XS or XR. But even if both phones had 100% battery health, I still think the iPhone XR would last longer because, spoiler, it has a lower resolution screen compared to the XS. So because the processor has to process fewer pixels, it consumes less power. So if I'm going to give an 8 out of 10 to the iPhone XR for battery life, I would give a 7.5 out of 10 to the iPhone XS. Now, speaking of performance, I'm sure you already know that both phones have the same A12 Bionic processor. The only difference here is that the iPhone XR has 3 gigs of RAM and the iPhone XS has 4. So the iPhone XR may struggle to keep as many apps open in the background as the iPhone XS, but I doubt you'll ever notice this because I haven't. But other than that, both phones feel equally fast and responsive as they should. And when it comes to gaming, they both perform very well. I personally did not notice any lag or frame drops even when playing graphically intensive games like Call of Duty. However, one thing you probably don't know is that because these phones are equipped with the A12 Bionic processor, they have all the new features in iOS 15, which isn't true for older iPhones. And that, I think, should be a big reason for buying these phones over maybe an iPhone 10 or something older. Now, just before we talk about the cameras, I want to take a moment to tell you about Surfshark VPN. So I'm sure you'll agree that we rely on the internet more than ever before, from streaming our favorite shows to keeping in touch with our loved ones, and even our banking for the most part is done online these days. We'd like to think our information is safe, but as our online footprint increases, so does our need for proper security. Surfshark is a VPN service that protects all your information by encrypting all the data that you send through the internet. When it comes to security, security and privacy, Surfshark takes it very seriously. All their servers run on RAM, which means that any information that would usually be on a hard drive is wiped off automatically whenever a server is turned off. Surfshark also does not monitor, track, or store what you do online. That means no connection or connectivity logs. Another great reason to use a VPN is that you can change your location and access content from streaming services that can be restricted based on the country you're in. Plus, it can be used on an unlimited number of devices, has high-speed servers in 65 countries, and has 24/7 customer support. If you're interested, visit the first link in the description or use promo code TechWalt at checkout to get an 83% discount and 3 extra months for free. Now, let's talk about the cameras. So, the iPhone XR has 3 cameras, a 12 megapixel standard wide-angle camera, a 12 megapixel 2x telephoto camera, and a 7 megapixel selfie camera. The iPhone XR, however, has 2. It has the same primary and selfie camera as the iPhone XS, but no telephoto camera. So in my personal opinion, I don't think that's a huge deal breaker. You can still take photos with a 2x zoom. The zoom will just be digital, not optical. So photos might not always be as detailed as they would be if taken from the XS, but they're not terrible. Portrait mode still works on the XR. The only difference is that on the XS, it works with people and objects, but on the XR, it will only work for human faces. However, sometimes or most times, portrait photos from the XR have more detail because the XR is always using the main camera, which is way better than the telephoto camera on the XS, and you can clearly see that in these photos. But to be fair, most times the XS does a slightly better job of cutting out the subject from the background. The good news, however, is that at least in bright and well-lit situations, photos and videos taken from both phones look really good. They're sharp, well exposed, and consistent. But unfortunately, in low light, photos from both phones don't look all that great. And it's because they don't have night mode, which I believe is one of the biggest drawbacks of these phones. Now, you can get around that by using a third-party app. Just know that you might have to pay for it. So not exactly a perfect solution. Now, if you're using an older iPhone and you generally like the way photos look, you will certainly like photos taken from these phones as well. Selfies from both phones also look pretty good. They're not bad. However, these selfie cameras are definitely not the greatest anymore, but they get the job done, and I think that's really what matters. So I wanted to give both phones an 8 out of 10 for the cameras, but the truth is that the telephoto camera on the XS makes it slightly more versatile for photography and cinematography, but not by a whole lot. So I guess an 8.2 out of 10 for the XS. Honestly, I would rather have an ultra-wide angle camera instead of a telephoto camera. That's something I genuinely wish at least one of these phones had. Alright, finally, let's talk about the screens. Okay, so the iPhone XR has a 6.1-inch LCD screen with a resolution of 828p, which is lower than 1080p. The iPhone XS, on the other hand, features a slightly smaller but much better 5.8-inch OLED screen with a resolution that's closer to 1440p, and it also supports HDR content. Now, through this video, I doubt you'll be able to see a difference between the screens. And to be honest, even in real life, you might not immediately see a difference, especially if you don't have both phones side by side. And it's because they both are actually good screens. So although the OLED screen on the XS and OLED technology in general is a lot better than LCD, it's just that the LCD screen on the iPhone XR is a really high quality LCD screen. So the difference is not as apparent, but that's not to say that there is no difference. You can definitely see a difference if you know what to look for. OLED screens will always show deeper blacks and they tend to have more contrast, which makes them look better. But other than that, both phones have great viewing angles, they both have a good amount of contrast, they look color accurate and sharp, and both get plenty bright. So using them outdoors shouldn't be a problem, or even at night because they can get quite dark. The XS is just a little better in all these areas. Now, the slightly thicker bezels around the screen are something you will certainly notice on the XR, which makes the XS look more premium. So although the screens are the biggest difference between these phones, at least in my opinion, they're not actually that different if you forget about the numbers. And that's really good. So I guess 7 out of 10 for the iPhone XR and 9 out of 10 for the iPhone XS. So in conclusion, I think the iPhone XR can do pretty much everything the XS can, but the XS is just better at doing all those things. Except the battery life, which is one of the 5 pillars of a great smartphone, at least according to Marquez. So just because of battery life, I think the XR is a better buy. It's pretty good at doing the things it can do, and it's not that much worse than the XS. But if a really nice screen is more important for you than battery life, then by all means, go for the iPhone XS. So there you have it. That's all for this video. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you later.